CBS World News brings you the early morning reports of its correspondents for the news of the world on Saturday, June 13th. Today we shall call in London and Washington and attempt to get you a report by shortwave radio from Australia. In addition, Chet Stanton will give you the latest developments from other points. But first, here's the general situation this morning. Japanese invasion forces on the Aleutian Islands are under attack from American planes, while details of American victories in the Coral Sea and Midway battles come from Washington and Hawaii. A new contingent of American troops has arrived safely in the British Isles. The siege of Sevastopol enters its 8th day, and a new Axis tank assault is reported in Libya. And now for more news, here is Chet Stanton.
Before hearing from Australia, here is a report on Russia. The Nazis are hurling more men, tanks, and planes against the besieged Crimean city of Sevastopol. The German offensive there, now in its 8th day, is believed to have reached its peak. Russian sources continue to describe the position of Sevastopol's defenders as very serious, but say the Germans are being steadily repulsed in their efforts to capture the naval base. In the Kharkov sector of the Russian front, Red Army troops are counterattacking. Soviet forces are said to be on the offensive again and engaged in furious fighting with enemy tanks and infantry. And now let's hear the reports of CBS foreign correspondents in important world capitals. After a brief pause, we take you to Australia.
CBS Australia. William J. Dunn reporting. Little activity was reported on Australia's war fronts today, but the home front was a scene of intense action as the work of equipping more than 7 million people with ration books got underway. The Commonwealth government is trying to complete this job within a 48-hour period, and although there will be some necessary exceptions, most of Australia will have its individual quota this time tomorrow night. It's Australia's first experience with rationing, and, presently at least, only clothing and tea, Australia's national beverage, are affected. Here's the way it will work, briefly. Mr. Blank is married and has 2 children. Each of the 4 persons in his family is issued a small book containing 112 clothing coupons and 26 tea coupons. Of the clothing coupons, 56 are for use any time in the next 6 months, the rest during the second half of the rationing year. Thus, the Blank family now have a total of 224 coupons for immediate use by 4 persons. Mr. Blank needs a plain, unlined overcoat, a pair of shoes, and a cotton shirt. These 3 items will take 54 of his 56 coupons, and if he has to buy a pair of socks requiring 4 coupons, Mother Blank will have to give him 2 of hers. Our nun father is through buying clothes until next November. Mother's silk stockings will require 4 coupons, her new dress 12, if she's satisfied with short sleeves. Son's sweater with long sleeves will take 5 coupons, and daughter's frock another 10. Each member of the family is entitled to buy 2 ounces of tea every 2 weeks in exchange for a coupon. The clothing coupons are interchangeable among the 4 immediate members of the family, but relatives are strictly forbidden to share in this exchange. The first day's work in issuing these books has proceeded very smoothly, and although long queues waited outside most of the issuing centers throughout the day, there was no excitement and only a little impatience. Every civilian in Australia, alien as well as citizen, comes under these new regulations, which must force a sharp reduction in clothing purchases. The purpose of the rationing program is to make sure that every resident of the Commonwealth gets his or her just share of available clothing and tea, and no more. The average citizen appears to accept the new regulations with entire goodwill. America is just now starting its observance of MacArthur Day, as decreed by Washington, but for General MacArthur himself, the day is about ended. The Allied commander varied his routine but little today, arriving at his office at the regular hour and remaining at his desk until evening, with only an interlude of about an hour at noon when he attended a small reception in his honor given by Prime Minister Curtin. Members of his staff visited his office during the day to pay their individual compliments, but General Headquarters made no official acknowledgement of the day. The General himself issued the brief statement which most of you have read through his official spokesman, but made no public appearances. This is William J. Dunn in Australia, returning to CBS in New York.
Next, across the Atlantic to the British capital. We take you now to London.
CBS London. Charles Collingwood reporting. In Libya, the battle is moving again. Axis tanks are thrusting east and north towards Tobruk. The battle center has moved away from Knightsbridge. Today's British communique says that there was severe fighting yesterday in the area south of El Adem. El Adem is only 20 miles from Tobruk. An Axis attack on El Adem, complete with dive bombers, was repulsed yesterday. After this repulse, the Axis tanks turned and drove to the northwest towards Akroma, which is on the coast. The British say that all their positions are intact and that considerable damage has been inflicted on the enemy. Military circles in London observe that this new development in the Desert War indicates that Rommel has reverted to his original plan. You remember that about 10 days ago, the British General Auchinleck, described the Axis plan. The plan was, first of all, to take Bir Hakeim, and then to move the Axis tanks out into the open desert where they could strike at Tobruk. This plan was frustrated when Bir Hakeim held and the enemy was forced back from El Adem and brought to battle around Knightsbridge. Well, now that Bir Hakeim has finally fallen, Rommel has started again. Just as on the first day of the campaign on May 27th, he has dashed out to El Adem, been repulsed, and turned off again for the northwest. What will happen from now on is not so clear. Anyone with half an eye can see that neither side is licked. There are going to be many more surprises in the desert. A little announcement came out here in London about 2 hours ago from the United States Army headquarters. It said that another contingent of United States Army troops has arrived at a Northern Ireland port. Included among the reinforcements, says the announcement, was a small detachment of Negro soldiers and additional mechanized equipment. Not a sensational announcement, but it underlines the fact that slowly and steadily, and not so slowly either, we are establishing a potent force in Northern Ireland. The British are still thinking a lot about the Anglo-Russian Treaty, and the more they look at it, the more remarkable a document they think it is. The sober Weekly Economist, a journal which is not given to hysterical judgments, says that the treaty may have as much significance for the future of world order as victory itself. Other commentators are evaluating the treaty in the light of the history of British diplomacy. As the Daily Telegraph points out this morning, the distinction of this alliance is that it will not terminate with the signing of the peace treaty. The Telegraph says that throughout our history, British policy has avoided committing itself to long-term responsibility for the affairs of Europe. But these are the comments of experts. The comments of the ordinary Briton are less scholarly, but they are perhaps no less important. The ordinary people in Britain neither fear nor distrust the Soviet Union. As one man said to me last night, and I think he's typical, we can't win the war without Russia, and we can't win the peace without Russia either. I'm glad we realize both things. This is Charles Collingwood in London, returning you to Columbia in New York.
And now for the news of our own nation's capital. We take you to Washington.
CBS Washington, John Purcell reporting. Action in the Aleutian Islands off Alaska is still continuing. The Japs have won footholds in the island of Attu at the extreme western tip of the Aleutian chain. But what they hope to gain by landing forces there is not clear. Naval spokesmen here say Attu is of no military value. They say that the Japanese have no chance of extending their gains. And some view it only as a face-saving gesture to make up in part for their disastrous defeats at Midway and in the Coral Sea. It appears now that the Japs made their landing under cover of fog. Because of the fog, American reconnaissance planes were hampered in searching for landing parties. But later, Army and Navy forces threw the enemy out of all the populated regions of the islands. A Navy communique of last night announced that weather conditions in the outlying islands precluded aerial reconnaissance until the last 24 hours. If the weather manages to stay clear for a while, we should have more news of operations by our air forces later today. The Jap landing at Attu marks the first time since the War of 1812 that enemy forces have invaded the North American continent. The island is small, not more than 20 miles in width. It is about 800 miles from the Japanese-owned Kurile Islands and the same distance from Dutch Harbor. To maintain an invasion force, the Japs would have to string their supply lines from the Kuriles.
but then they would be vulnerable to attack by our land-based bombers. And the Japs have very little carrier protection left to maintain these lines. Officials here believe, too, that the Japanese communication lines in the Southwest Pacific are now in danger because of their heavy naval losses. The Navy is making no exaggerated claims, but military observers believe that the Japanese offensive power has been crippled. The Japs have lost probably half of their carrier units, and as you know, the carrier today is the backbone of the fleet. Before the war, Japan was believed to have 10 carriers, although she probably had more than are listed in naval manuals. At any rate, 6 have been sunk, and others damaged and put out of action temporarily. By contrast, the United States lost the carrier Lexington and suffered damage to another. Looking back at the Coral Sea and Midway engagements, military experts are crediting the Japanese Naval High Command with a series of blunders. They underestimated U.S. strength at Midway, and in both battles fell prey to the devastating power of land-based bombers working in close cooperation with naval aircraft. The destruction of the Czechoslovakian town of Lidice in reprisal for Hangman Heydrich's death brought an expression of disgust last night from Secretary of State Hull. He referred to the Nazi massacre as too beastly even for savages. And today, the Czech Foreign Minister, Masaryk, urges the destruction of several German villages in retaliation. In a formal statement issued through the legation, he said, "The same number of deluded Germans should pay the supreme price until they are forced to rid themselves of the unsavory memory of that dreadful man, Heydrich." This is John Purcell in Washington, returning you to CBS in New York.
Turning again to the news of the Far East, official quarters in China today hailed with approval the new understandings and agreements recently reached by the United States, Great Britain, and Russia. One Chinese spokesman said the Anglo-Soviet 20-year Mutual Assistance Pact and the Lend-Lease Agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union would have an immediate effect on the United Nations war effort and beneficial effects on the peace effort. The arrangements made for post-war collaboration by the 3 largest United Nations also met with Chinese favor. There have been no reports from the actual fighting fronts in China since yesterday's communique describing the Japanese advance westward into Jiangxi province. Chinese defenders of the Zhejiang province capital, Chushan, evacuated the ancient city Wednesday after a gallant defense against heavy odds. Even before Chushan fell, a column of Japanese troops had pressed past the city toward the Nangzhou-Hanzhou Railway. From Mexico City this morning comes word that all Axis business properties in Mexico are now liable to government seizure. The government is prepared to take control of all Axis property it considers usable against the Mexican people. Stores, banks, and industries are affected by the decree. The purpose of the move is twofold. In the first place, the government wishes to protect the jobs of Mexican employees in such firms, and the move is also designed to keep the nation's economic life from being unduly disturbed. The total value of Axis property in Mexico is estimated to reach a value of $54 million. Of this total, the Germans themselves own $50 million.